Hello, and welcome to the EDGE Beta Test Information Session. I'm Samantha Becker from the University of Washington Information School. Today's program is a repeat of webinars that were broadcast on April 5th and April 12th. This is not a live recording of the meeting that took place, but a recording that was done afterwards. So we won't have the live question and answer sessions from both of those webinars, but I will go over some of the questions and answers that we received during those webinars. So today's program, we're going to be going over three main topics. First of all is an overview of the EDGE initiative, the background of the initiative, and the participants and goals. The second area will be information about the beta test, how to fill out the assessment workbook, and explanation of some of the terminology. And then again, I will go over some of the questions and answers from the other sessions. So first, an overview of the EDGE initiative. The EDGE initiative has been going on for about a year and a half now. Its goal is to create and foster the adoption of benchmarks that the library field can use to look at the quality and sufficiency of public access technology and set goals and measures for continuous improvement. And then most importantly, to demonstrate the value of public access technology to people and communities, leaders, funders, and others to help motivate investment needed to maintain the quality of services. It was felt by the coalition, which is supported by the Gates Foundation, that having benchmarks would allow libraries to show what kind of services they provide, the level of quality of those services, and be able to talk about them with policymakers and others in a way that makes sense to those folks. So the guiding principles of the EDGE initiative is that these benchmarks will be aspirational. They're designed to help show the library field where they could be. The assessment tool will be voluntary, so nobody is telling libraries that they must do this in order to get something. This is a purely voluntary assessment for libraries that are interested in using benchmarks and indicators. We want the EDGE initiative to help all libraries recognize their achievements and provide a path for continual improvement. And this is a really important aspect of the EDGE initiative. We are looking at libraries of all sizes and types, serving all different types of communities, and we want to try to find a tool and design a tool that will be useful for all different types of libraries to assess their public access technology. The benchmarks and the tools that will be developed to support it will evolve to meet the changing needs of the library community. So that means it will be a living framework that will adjust and grow and change as public access technology in the library field changes. So as it develops, there will be a governing structure to allow those changes to happen so that the benchmarks and the indicators that measure them won't become stagnant. And we also want to make sure that the benchmarks provide clear value for the library that uses them and the local leaders that hear about them. So we will be creating tools and supports and other training and information to help libraries make the best use of them. The EDGE Coalition, which has been working on this project together, is led by a coalition of library and government organizations that includes the ALA, the Public Library Association, Lyrasis, OCLC. This initiative is supported with funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who have been really an active member of it. We also have the International City County Management Association, which helps bring in the perspective of city and county managers who we see as being on the receiving end of the information that's gathered through the EDGE initiative and through the benchmarks. The University of Washington and the University of Maryland have also been involved, providing support and research And then there are three state libraries, California, Oklahoma, and Texas, who've been really deeply involved in the initiative from the beginning, who are hosting pilot sites within the states and have been bringing us the perspective of state libraries and local libraries to help keep the initiative very grounded and real and useful to libraries across the country. So the purpose of the EDGE initiative is to help you as a public library leader assess the quality of public access technology services. And we've done that across three dimensions. We have the internal looking uh, uh, services in terms of the infrastructure and services to the public, staffing needs, use of volunteers. We have an area called Engaging the Community, which is about building partnerships and relationships with external stakeholders. And then the real substantive area, which is providing value to patrons through the resources and services that are available to them. Um, the way that the initiative is envisioned to help you continuously improve services is that it will show you where you are compared to these benchmarks and provide you real instruction and help and support on how to improve services to meet more of the benchmarks and more of the indicators. The other way that this initiative will help you is that it helps demonstrate the value of your public access services and the need for reinvestment to your funders. So it'll provide concrete measures to bring to funders about what you do and how you compare to other libraries in the areas where reinvestment will make the biggest difference. The EDGE initiative is a comprehensive package, so it's not just the assessment that we are asking you to help us test today, but it's also the framework itself. So we have this framework that structures the indicators, that talks about goals and priorities. We have the self-assessment tool, which is what we're testing. The self-assessment tool will eventually be online and will be automated so that you'll get your scores immediately. What we're testing right now is a paper prototype of that tool. We'll also eventually have training and support materials. So that will be training on both how to take the assessment and use the assessment, and also training on how to take the results of your assessment and talk about them with your policymakers and funders, how to do presentations with community groups and that kind of thing. And other communication tools will also be included, such as PowerPoint presentations and talking points and letters to the editor. So we really want to make this a comprehensive package that you'll be able to go online, take the assessment, tell us where you are right now with the services that you offer, and in return we will give you a list of improvements that you can make to improve your overall score, and then communication tools that you can take to your policymakers and funders to help show them what you're accomplishing and what more investment would help you accomplish. So I'm going to go over the beta test information. So you received by email through the University of Washington an assessment package. This is a PDF document that was attached to an email from us. And I know it looks very lengthy and maybe a little daunting to fill out, but hopefully with some instruction and a little better understanding of what's contained in it, you'll be able to pretty quickly go through it and provide the results to us. The purpose of the beta test is really not to test you and the resources that you have available. We're not trying to judge you or where you are right now. What we're trying to do is we're trying to collect enough data about the indicators and the benchmarks to determine whether we have them right, whether the coalition's work has been successful, and where we need to revise the indicators and the benchmarks and improve the framework. So we're concentrating on those three strategic areas that I mentioned earlier. The community value, which is promoting digital literacy and supporting community priorities in terms of education, employment, health, and government and legal services. So those are content areas and training areas where the library might offer resources or services. Then we're looking at how you engage with the community, what kind of leadership you lend to the community in terms of how you serve on community institutions and boards, what kind of partnerships you have, and what kind of communications you engage in with your stakeholders, with your patrons, and with your policymakers. And then finally is that internal looking aspect of organizational management, which are your policies and planning, how you intend to maintain your public access technology, your use of volunteers and staffing, and the technology infrastructure that you maintain. So this is really the area about quality and sufficiency that we know is a big concern to a lot of libraries providing these services. So the way that we go about measuring this achievement, the way that the benchmark framework works, is that we have those three strategic areas. And within those three strategic areas, we have benchmarks. And the benchmarks are specific measurable goals. So they are things like we will provide digital literacy training to our community members. These are specific goals that the EDGE Coalition, through their work and their work with librarians across the country, determined are appropriate goals for public access technology. From there, we developed a set of indicators. The indicators are designed to measure whether the benchmarks have been met. So if you take a benchmark like we will provide digital literacy services to our community, we need to have a way of measuring whether that has occurred. And the way that we measure that is by developing indicators where a specific number or specific action can be developed to link to the benchmark. So in the case of digital literacy, an indicator that you are doing that you are working towards the goal of digital literacy in the community is whether or not you provide classes in basic computer instruction. So that's how it works. Indicators are measures of benchmarks. Benchmarks are goals within those three strategic areas. So as I mentioned, the beta test is a test of the assessment tool, the paper prototype of what will be an online tool. It's designed to collect data about the indicators and benchmarks. This is really an important part of the beta test so that we have enough data to figure out where the library world is right now, to figure out a scoring rubric so that we can tell you what level you've achieved at, and also to collect this general feedback about the framework. So we really want to hear what you think about the framework, what kind of improvements you think we can make to the framework, and what you think of the indicators, how easy or how difficult they are to measure. The assessment workbook, that PDF package that we sent to you, contains an introduction about the initiative, so some of what I already went over. Instructions for how to complete the workbook, fields that will help us understand what you needed to complete the assessment. So we're really interested in making the assessment as easy to complete as is possible, and we want to know what kinds of digging for information that you need to do in order to fill it out. And then we have a series of questions about your public access resources and services, and what it is that you're doing. That is the data that we are gathering to be able to answer whether you've met the indicators in the benchmark. And then all along the way, we have opportunities for feedback. So the assessment workbook starts with intake questions. So this is just basic information about your library to help us keep your data distinct from other libraries. So the name of your library, who's filled out the um, assessment, what your contact information is. We've also heard from a lot of libraries that they'll be receiving help completing the assessment from their state library or from a consortium, and so we just ask that you check the box there in that field if you've received help. That will help us understand how much effort it takes to complete the assessment and whether there are ways that we can make it easier. The assessment workbook then asks for information about your assessment team according to areas of services. We expect for a small library, these may all be the same person. It may all be the library director. It may be just one or two people. In a larger library, it might require many different people to be involved in filling out the assessment and gathering the information required. We're just asking that you provide this little bit extra information so that we understand again the burden on libraries for completing the assessment and what resources it might take to do that. That will help us later on be able to tell libraries what they can expect and what information they'll need to gather before they get started. Then the assessment workbook asks about resources used to complete the assessment. This is mostly documents that we're asking whether or not you have, whether or not you referred to while you were doing the assessment. And what we'd like to know also is whether the document that we're asking for is available to the public and whether it's posted to a public internet space. This is data to help us again revise the framework, make sure that it works, make sure that the information that we're asking for is readily available. So the assessment workbook is broken into three sections, three groups around those strategic areas. It gives you context around each indicator question by stating the EDGE intention. That is the intention around the group of the strategic group, and then a benchmark statement. So as I mentioned earlier in the community value area, one of the benchmarks is to provide assistance and training to increase the level of digital literacy. And so you'll see those, each of the benchmarks are 14 benchmarks, and you'll see those benchmark statements at each section. Then it goes on to ask specific questions about the indicators. These are indicators that measure whether or not the benchmark has been met. Most of the questions are asked in a yes/no format, and all you need to do to record your responses is click the radio buttons on the form. And I just want to pause here to remind you that you should save the PDF form when you get it from us by email. You want to save a local copy, maybe on your desktop or in your file. So you'll need to click Save As after you open it and keep a local copy of that. Then you can save the form as you go along and also save it and return to it later if you need to. So don't forget to save. If you download it, sometimes it will just go into a temporary internet file and your responses might get lost if you don't save a copy on your desktop or somewhere else. So most of these questions are yes, no. They should be pretty quick for you to fill out. We expect most of the questions you'll know off the top of your head. There are some that will require a little bit more knowledge or specific data to fill out. Those questions are asking certain things such as a number, percent, or a date when something has happened. We asked about whether you have surveyed patrons about their use of public technology with regard to certain activities. So we want to know whether you have surveyed your patrons, and if you have surveyed them about these particular activities, what percent of your patrons responded that they had used the computers for that purpose, and then when you did your latest survey about use. Some of you may have participated in the impact survey, or maybe you used your own survey instrument at some point in the past few years to find out what your patrons are doing and how they're using the computers. So that's what we're asking there, is whether you surveyed your patrons and what percent of the patrons, if you have, what percentage of the patrons survey used the computers for the purposes listed. If you haven't surveyed your patrons about their activities specifically, you just need to answer not asked. At the end of each of the benchmark sections, we have an area for you to provide us feedback. We want to know how difficult it was for you to provide the information that we asked for, whether it was difficult because you didn't understand the question or difficult because you had to go looking for information. Please just give us a numeric value by clicking one of those boxes are radio buttons from 1 to 6. And then what we'd like to know are answers to two open-ended questions. One is what you consider to be the very best practice for achieving that particular benchmark. So we have a number of indicators that we think indicate whether the benchmark has been achieved. We want to know what's the highest bar that you can think of that would achieve for example, digital literacy in your library. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that your library is doing currently. It may not even be something that your library plans on doing. Maybe it's just not something needed in your community. But we'd like to know kind of what that highest level is, what you think that is, whether it's something you've seen in another library, whether it's something that you think might be a good idea, or it's something that your library aspires to do. I'd just like to know that if you have any ideas. If you don't, that's fine too. And then we provide another area there for you to provide written feedback about that particular benchmark and the indicators. So any thoughts that you have, maybe you don't think that the indicator is relevant, maybe you think that it's a very important indicator, maybe you think that there are other indicators that should be included in that benchmark. Whatever it is that you have to provide us feedback with is really appreciated. It's a really important part of what we're doing and trying to make the benchmarks work for all libraries. At the end of the assessment workbook, there is a glossary that defines terms or describes resources that are in the workbook, in the assessment workbook. So there may be some terms that you might not be familiar with, or maybe you at your local library use a different term instead of the one that we use. So if you have questions about what we're asking, you may want to look at the glossary first. If you still don't have an answer to that question, please do feel free to email or call us, and we'll be happy to explain. Or if you're not sure how to answer, please also just give us a call or shoot us an email, and we'll be happy to talk it over with you and figure out the best way for you to respond. So after the assessment, after you return your assessment workbook to us, around mid-May, after we've analyzed all the data from the libraries that have returned assessment packets, you'll receive a resource packet for your library, and it will have the results of your assessment, so a summary of how you answered the benchmarks and the indicator questions, and we'll have that. We'll also provide you with the average responses of other libraries that took the assessment, pure libraries that took the assessment as well. And then what we're doing is we're also going to be providing you with information on resources that you may want to use to enhance your public access technology. So when you're looking over your results, you may notice that in certain areas you didn't do as well as other pure libraries, and you may want to improve your performance in those areas. So what we'll be doing is providing you with some resources, links to online instructions, links to other resources that may help you improve. So for example, perhaps the way that you manage your bandwidth isn't optimal. The assessment reveals that you may have ways of there may be room to optimize your bandwidth. We will provide you with links to instructions that give you some ideas, some specific instructions on how to optimize your bandwidth. So the questions that we had in the webinars, one of the main questions that we hear coming up, both in the webinars and in the calls that we've gotten since we launched the beta test, is whether or not libraries that may not be able to answer yes to a lot of questions should still fill out the assessment. And our answer to that is yes, please. Absolutely. We really do want to hear from you. We are not judging your library. What we want to know is where the library field is right now, whether the benchmarks are aspirational, and what kind of resources we might provide a library that maybe right now doesn't offer a lot of public access resources, what kind of support we can provide to them if they want to offer more. But we need to hear from libraries of all different types, sizes, and different places in terms of what they're offering in order to do that well. Um, so it would be great, even if you think that your library can't answer many of the questions affirmatively, if you would go ahead and fill it out anyway. Please don't feel embarrassed or like you're not achieving something that you should be doing. We fully recognize that libraries have many, many reasons why they're not doing all of the things that are listed in the workbook. And we also, from the research that we've done at the University of Washington, we know and have predicted that very, very few libraries will achieve all of the things in the workbook. And in fact, our prediction model that we're comparing to the data that we're collecting through the beta test, the prediction model says that less than half of libraries are achieving 50% of the indicators that are listed there. So the indicators are really, what in a perfect world, a library with unlimited funding and unlimited competing interests or no competing interests at all would do. That's everything. And we don't think that any library out there is really going to be doing everything, but we want to know what the scale is. And we want to hear from you in your responses, the reasons for it, because we recognize that it may be because of lack of funding, or it may be that you live in a community where those resources just aren't really necessary, or there isn't a lot of need or interest in them. So that's an important thing to keep in mind, and we really do want to hear from libraries of all types. The other question that we're hearing is how long does it take to fill it out? As I said before, we think most of the questions are yes, no, that a library director will be able to just simply check off. If there's a few questions about bandwidth in your building, the hours that you're open, those kinds of things that may take a little bit of digging. And then we're asking for that written feedback. If you do all of those things and give us the written feedback, we have timed it a few times, and it seems like it takes about 1 to 3 hours. I know that that is a big commitment for a lot of libraries. And I just really appreciate, we all really, really appreciate that time that you're going to spend doing that. It is so important for us to get this data and try to get the benchmarks right for as many libraries as we can. What to do if you don't understand a question or you don't have an answer. So some libraries may find that a question is not applicable to them or they're not quite sure what it is. Do your best to fill out all of the questions if it's possible. If it's really impossible and you're finding yourself skipping over a question, if you could just leave us a note in the feedback section about why you didn't answer a particular question, that will be very, very helpful to us. We had a question come up about what if you had in the past offered a particular service but cut it back because of funding or because there was no interest in it. We didn't have a specific spot for that in the options. So if you could just mark that you do not and plan to offer that service. And then in the notes section, just leave us a little note that says that at some point you had done it, but you decided not to any longer. All the data that you can provide to us is good data and important data that we'll make use of. Another question that came up is about interviews. We will be doing a small sample of telephone interviews with libraries that have completed their assessment workbooks. This will just be a little bit more in-depth information for us about how the assessment process went for you and what we can do to improve it. We don't expect that those calls and those interviews will take more than an hour of your time. And again, this is just really important information for us to have and for the University of Washington to take back to the coalition so that we can make the indicators better. Another question is what's going to happen after this. After the assessment period, this beta test, the University of Washington will be compiling the results and doing some analysis. One of the big purposes of our analysis is to find out whether there are certain types of libraries that are systematically disadvantaged. So whether it's because of the library's population or because of the per capita funding, maybe it's the building size or the number of FTE staff. We are going to analyze the data from all different angles to see if there is some disadvantage that libraries have that makes it an external force that makes it difficult for a particular type of library to be successful. And if that's the case, then we'll begin to look at weighting and handicapping the scores so that those disadvantages are alleviated and that libraries are all on the same footing in terms of their ability to succeed with the benchmarks. After we've done our analysis, there's going to be a pilot study with 4 libraries spread out from Texas, California, and Oklahoma. The pilots will be looking at not only the assessment process, but also those executive tools, the communication tools and how that works for talking with policymakers, what policymakers think of the benchmarks and whether they're effective for communicating the need for public access and the need for investments. Then we'll be doing a big revision based on the data and based on our findings from the pilot studies, and then that will be piloted again. In the meantime, we'll be building the online self-assessment tool and making that automated with the information for improving and technical support, and also customizing the communication tools. So all of that's going to be built over the summer and then the beginning of the year, and we're hoping that the version 1 of the EDGE benchmarks and indicators will be available to the library field early next year. That was about all of the questions that we heard during the original webinars. If you have other questions that you want answered, or you have any type of questions at all as you're filling out the assessment workbook, please do get in contact with us. We're standing by for your call or your email. We'll get back to you just as soon as we possibly can. And we're keeping track of the questions that you have so that we can make sure that when this process goes live, that it will be easy for your colleagues at other libraries to complete. So we really appreciate your participation in this. I know that this is a huge investment of your time. This is just an important evaluation process, and it's a great service to the library community that you're participating. So we really do appreciate your participation. We really do want to make this as easy on you as possible and support all of your efforts in getting it done. So keep in touch with us. Let us know what you think and how it's going. And if you have any questions at all, get in touch with us right away. The assessment workbooks are due back to us April 30th, so hopefully that will give you enough time to complete that, and it won't feel too pressured. So again, from University of Washington and from the EDGE Coalition, thank you so much for participating in the beta test, and we look forward to hearing from you.